In this video, we will talk about a virtual machine, the concept of virtualization, the hypervisor, and we'll take a look at a couple of types of hypervisors that are available. So, virtualization is a technology that allows operating systems to run as applications within other operating systems. So, if you look at this diagram on the left here, we have several applications that are currently running on a particular operating system, and that particular operating system is using certain physical resources. But all of that is an environment, a virtual environment. So that is a virtual environment one, and we have another virtual environment over here in blue. So each of these are separate operating systems that are essentially sharing physical resources that are available to both those operating systems. So there is a level of hardware abstraction that is going on, which is enabled by the virtualization layer. Now, this virtualization layer has a different name. It's also called as a virtual machine monitor, or VMM. And that is where we are going to have the software layer of a hypervisor being implemented at the virtualization layer. And what that virtualization layer is able to do is it is able to share all these physical resources. So, for example, the four main resources being the processor, your memory, the network interface card, and the disk. So these resources, the hardware resources, are being shared by different operating systems that are being hosted as environments on a particular hardware. So and each virtual machine. So we have two virtual machines that are being shown here. We have VM1 here and VM2 virtual machine, not to be confused with virtual memory. Um, So, what does this hardware level abstraction include? It encapsulates all the operating system and application state within that virtual machine. And this virtualization layer, which sits underneath those virtual machines, also called as these are also called guest operating systems. There's a extra level of indirection that is enabled by that virtualization layer between the virtual machines and the actual physical resources. So it essentially decouples the hardware from all the operating systems. It enforces isolation between each virtual machine, and it is able to multiplex the physical hardware. There is only limited physical hardware which is being multiplexed across several virtual machines here. So this can lead to cost saving, tremendous amount of cost saving, because if we have a lot of processing power which uses electricity and a lot of physical footprint, we can host several virtual machines and be able to completely utilize those resources at a very high utilization rate. So let's talk about what a hypervisor is. Um, Virtualization is simply the process of creating a software based or virtual version of something, whether it be computer storage, networking services, servers, or applications. And what makes virtualization feasible is the hypervisor. So it is a software that is installed on the computer hardware, which is responsible to create that virtualization layer. It acts as a platform for those virtual machine environments to be created on. It manages the sharing of physical resources between the virtual machines. So essentially, it is pulling the resources from the physical server, the actual computer hardware, and is allocating them to the virtual environments. There are essentially two types of hypervisors. There is a type 1, there's type 2. Type 1 is also called as a bare metal hypervisor. And what in the bare metal hypervisor, the hypervisor is installed directly on top of the physical server. And some examples include VMware, ESXi server, Microsoft Hyper-V, and open source KVM. Type 2 or hosted hypervisor is one in which there is a layer of host OS that sits between the hardware and the hypervisor. So in the type 1, we have the hardware, and on top of that, we have the hypervisor. And in the type 2, we have hardware, and on top of that, we have a host OS, and there is the hypervisor on top of that. And some examples include Oracle VirtualBox or VMware Workstation. So these are essentially end user virtual machines, and you might have used that to, for example, run Linux on a Windows machine. So this is a quick look on what virtual machine is, what is a virtualization concept, and we'll continue with our lectures on system calls in the next lecture.